Welcome everybody, this is Philip Tracy from RCR Wireless News and Industrial IoT 5G. Welcome to IoT in Action, your source for IoT use cases and case studies. Today I'm here with Mike Troiano. He is the Vice President of IoT at AT&T. Mike, thanks for being here.
Thank you, good to be here.
Now we're going to do something a little bit different today. Instead of jumping right into the case studies and use cases, we're going to talk about some news that AT&T released last week on IoT-specific data plans. Mike, could you give us a quick overview of what this means and what folks can expect out of these data plans?
I'd love to. So just backing up a little bit, earlier this year, we launched our AT&T Starter Kit. So it's a next generation kit for developers, application developers, to get started in cellular IoT. And so for $99, you can actually buy a kit that includes hardware, SIM, or connectivity back into our network, as well as cloud storage, and the ability for application developers to build out their applications on our Flow Designer IoT application development platform. And so that's been out of the market for the last several weeks. And one of the things that several of the developers who contacted us said, listen, hey, I tinker at 2 in the morning on some of these things. And what happens when I run out of data and I actually need to top it off? And it got into a broader conversation of, hey, we have developers all over the United States and certainly in other geographies as well that are looking to use these assets, and they don't really want to engage directly necessarily with an AT&T sales rep. If they can do this online, any hour of the day, pretty much any geography, relative to the United States, could be up on a mountain, could be down in the ocean on the beach. If they have access to a credit card, they should be able to get access to wireless data plans. And so that was really what was behind the scenes on this one. And so it's focused predominantly on people who are just getting started with IoT. It is as simple as a credit card transaction, and if you outgrow these data plans and based on volume or other needs, you need to engage with a direct sales rep with an AT&T, obviously we'll make that happen.
Perfect. And just for those of you who haven't seen yet, the data plans are 1 gigabyte of data will cost $25, 3 gigabytes at $60, and 5 at $100. How is the pricing and the data amounts determined? What can somebody get with each tier of data allotment? Somebody who's using the AT&T Starter Kit.
Well, so the data plans actually, there are 3 options as you just outlined, and part of that is dependent also on the number of devices that you have associated with each plan. So if you're just a developer that's going to do a couple of hundred SIMs, you're most likely going to go after the $25 plan. If you're looking at, several hundred devices, you may want to move up. And a lot of it is application dependent, as you would imagine. If you're working on a basic telemetry or metering solution and you're not sending a lot of data, then that's going to send you down one direction, versus if you're starting to think about high bandwidth applications, maybe even video, right, that's going to take on a totally different construct. So it's based on two components, right? Number of devices as well as the amount of data that one would consume.
Great. And if you don't mind, could you take us through the process? Somebody wants to get into IoT. They're looking at AT&T. You've already got a starter kit, and you have data, kind of everything you need to start building. What would the process be for somebody in that situation?
That's a great question. So first of all, the starter kit as it is today is really to prove out a proof of concept. And for most companies or developers, when they build it out in the starter kit, that prove their point, and then they start to think about, how do I go into production? And so that might mean working with different device manufacturers, dependent, again, it's very much application centric. So if we're talking about a device that needs to go in a piece of heavy equipment, tractor, right, that's going to be shipped around the world, could be in very cold climates like Alaska, could be in the desert, the next year. You have to think about the environmental conditions. Everything that goes on the network must be certified by AT&T, and we have a dedicated lab actually down in Austin, Texas, that all they do is focus in on IoT devices. And ironically, one of the biggest reasons devices fail our labs is actually because of antenna design, in terms of how does the black box actually communicate with the cellular network. So we spent a lot of time helping customers think through that, which ecosystem partners they should work with. Oftentimes you also get into the conversation about, well, I built a proof of concept, maybe I need to really think about how I'm going to instantiate that application. And so you might have seen over the last couple of weeks some interesting announcements that we put out relative to our relationship with IBM, or even last week with Amazon. And so the ability for developers to start in our environment and then actually launch those applications in production in other third-party clouds. And you'll see more relationships and announcements on that dimension as we move forward. So it really is an ecosystem type play. Many of the developers and even businesses that come to us, they realize there's very little off the shelf that you can go buy from an application standpoint for IoT. And so they're looking for the broad horizontal tools and platforms to really build something out and get to market. And also, the last point I guess I would make is when you think about at least the tools and platforms we brought to market, these are open source, open standards type of applications. And one of the things we hear from developers often, as we do, as you're probably well aware, a number of developer labs and hackathons throughout the United States as well as abroad, is developers don't want to get stuck in proprietary hardware, software, right applications. So that whole concept is extraordinarily important to us, and it's advice that we give to our developer community as we roll these out.
Perfect. And one more thing I want to talk about before we go from those starting up and those who have already been successful using AT&T to build their IoT system is your announcement last week on LTE-M and the fact that you will be doing this in San Francisco. What will this enable enterprises in the city to do? Who should we expect to see roll out IoT deployments? And why is this new?
Right. So great question. So there are a number of newer technologies that are being introduced, not only in the United States, but globally, as we think about the concept of lower power on these devices. Just to put things in perspective, in today's environment, if you were to launch an asset tracking device with an LTE radio in it, there's a good likelihood that that's only going to last a couple of days out of the market. And of course, that depends on how often you're pinging the device, right, in terms of data consumption and battery consumption. When you get to something like LTE-M, which is designed differently, the power consumptions are dramatically lower. So we're talking about, in terms of pilots and things that we're doing with customers, going from weeks or even a couple of months of battery consumption to years on that same asset. Okay, so it's a dramatically different point on battery life. The modules themselves are dramatically lower as well. So the cost, the hardware cost, right, to actually integrate a solution dramatically different when we get to LTE-M than what you have in the broader LTE arrangement. And then honestly, it's deeper penetrated coverage. So what our testing is finding is that we can go deeper into buildings and infrastructure because of this technology. So to your point a minute ago, what we've announced publicly is that we are doing a pilot later this year in California. We'll start to expand from that in early 17, and the goal is to have a national footprint of LTE-M across the United States late next year. What we also announced, though, last week is that there are a number of ecosystem partners that are partnering with us around these solutions. So everything from meter manufacturers to consumer electronics companies like Samsung, even over to beverage companies like Pepsi as an enterprise, as they look at how do these technologies help them track their assets better, manage their field service representatives better, right? There are a number of business transformation conversations that you can start to have with enterprise customers as these price points and cost curves come down.
And that'll all be sprouting up and growing next month, and we'll definitely have a lot more coverage on that as it happens. For now, you've already released some case studies on companies who are already using AT&T's network for their IoT solution. You mentioned asset tracking, so I think we should just start off with Farmer's Fridge. We've written a lot on our website, Industrial IoT 5G, about maritime fridge monitoring, asset tracking, supply chain management. This case study follows similar lines on a more personal, smaller level. Can you tell us about what Farmer's Fridge was trying to do and how they used AT&T?
I think it's a great question. I actually want to bring it up just to a higher level, because to your point, we do have, and they're a great example, but we have a number of customers that are starting to gravitate to some certain use cases. And when you start to think about food, you think about food quality, you think about shipping goods, whether it's fruit or seafood, and the fact that it has to be in a temperature controlled zone for compliance reasons, as well as other service levels that some of these vendors might have to their customer bases. That's really important to monitor, right? Think about shipping, again, we'll talk seafood for just a minute, from Thailand to Austin, Texas, right? I mean, it's out on the ocean for a number of days, it hits a port, then it's on a truck, that's on a rail car, et cetera. So what these companies are saying to us is, listen, AT&T, you've done this for other customers and sometimes different verticals, but how do you start to take that technology and help us solve business problems where we're looking at not only the location, but we're looking at the temperature, we're looking at the humidity, and we can start to make real-time business decisions if we think there's spoilage and actually move that product from one place to another. So food and food safety and just the supply chain in general, again, whether the assets out on the ocean, whether it's on land, even quite frankly, whether it's up in the air, you think about air cargo, because actually a lot of this stuff is actually shipped in that way. These things become really important to monitor. And so asset and freight, really important to us. The other just staying on kind of the transportation space for a minute, we also announced last week a very important relationship with Daimler, which is one of the largest trucking manufacturers on earth. And so Daimler will start to look at embedded technologies in their vehicles that actually will have AT&T connectivity inside of those. So a really strategic relationship, just like you have seen in the connected vehicle, the connected car space over the last number of years, as companies like General Motors have moved very dramatically to build embedded telematics in their cars, passenger cars. You're starting to see that on the freight side as well. And then I think one of the other case studies you brought up is really in the healthcare space. And we had announced earlier this year a healthcare foundry down in Houston, Texas, where all we do in that facility is focus in on bringing ecosystem partners that are interested in building out healthcare solutions. And we bring the best and brightest from the ecosystem. We bring our engineers, software and hardware, to help them get from point A to point B. And we're seeing some really, really interesting devices and solutions start to sprout out, even just in the last few months since we've opened that up. So really exciting front there.
Definitely. I think it's interesting, the three big points we've talked about so far. Connected vehicles, a lot of what IoT has to do with connected vehicles now deals with safety, monitoring food, and then of course more directly healthcare. So clearly IoT has some really potential to save lives, really. And
there's no doubt. I mean, in a lot of cases, because there are so many IoT applications out there in a lot of different industries and verticals, but for us, at least right now, most of this comes down to three really big buckets. One is around connected vehicles. And so we talk about connected cars as well as the big rigs, like the Daimler example. The second place is actually connected cities. We're doing a lot in that. How do we help cities with industrial lighting, with water and leak detection, which you may not know is, the average city actually loses 20 to 30% of their water each year just because of leaks. So there's a huge opportunity to save money there. But then the other part is connected industry, and that's where we put enterprise fleet tracking. That's where we put things like asset management and supply chain. And in some industries, these are starting to come together, right? I mean, you can start to see how over time the connected vehicle and the smart cities, if you think about traffic management, that starts to come together. You can obviously see the parallel between connected trucks and connected assets and having full visibility through the supply chain. So, we sit at a very interesting cross section of businesses right now that are trying to solve these solutions for themselves and transform their businesses. And the last point I guess I would make to your question, how do we help? We actually help because we see so many of these applications globally. In fact, many of the deals we're working on today, the companies are not even based in the United States. They're based in Europe or Asia or other parts of the world. And so we're able to take the best practices from some of those customer engagements and then share those with other customers, not always in the same industry, right? But to be able to get them to a place that they could not necessarily get to on their own.
Great. Well, I'm sure we could talk about this for the rest of the day, but we're running low on time, but we've certainly covered a lot of ground. So Mike, thank you very much for speaking with me today.
You're very welcome. Thank you.